Hi, this is Debbie and thank you for joining me today as I watercolour this Mother's Day card. I know Mother's Day isn't imminent for everyone around the world, but here in the UK, Mother's Day is tomorrow, the 11th of March, and this is the card I sent my mum along with a lovely bunch of flowers in her favourite colours. On my blog, the coordinating blog post for this video is part of a blog hop with a giveaway, and I'll tell you more about that at the end of the video. For now, let's crack on. The stamp set I'm using today is called Even More Spring Flowers, and is a new set as part of a recent Best Days release from Simon Says Stamp. As the name suggests, this stamp set joins others in the series similarly styled flower sets, including spring flowers, more spring flowers, summer flowers, and even winter flowers. Even though I have the other sets, in my opinion you can never have too many flower sets. They are my most favourite thing to colour, and probably my most favourite way to colour them is to watercolour. I recently splurged on a new set of brushes in a lovely case. These are Escoda travel brushes and I count them as an investment and hope they will last me a long time. Today I'm using the size 4 for the main body of the painting and the size 2 brush for details, and these brushes are available separately. I'll leave links in the YouTube description below for all the products I'm using today. For my paints, I have my favourite Daniel Smith watercolours in their inexpensive travel palette. I'll be using a couple of watercolour techniques as I paint. When I first add the lightest layer of paint, I then dab my brush on the paper towel and then use the barely damp brush to lift colour from areas I want there to be a highlight. Lifting the colour like this leaves a paler area to represent a highlight where the light might be catching the petal or leaf. With my base layer and highlight in place, I then use the wet on wet technique to add deeper, more concentrated colour at the base of the petal or leaf. These areas are where you would naturally expect to find shadows. Adding the deeper colour of paint while the first layer is still wet allows the paint to move with the water and gently blend into the base layer. This wet on wet technique is one of my favourites, as although you can't totally control where the paint will flow, it always gives a beautiful result. My nature is to be neat, tidy and precise, and the unpredictable nature of watercolour is something I used to struggle with, but I love the results of watercolour and I'm getting better at letting the paint do its own thing and then working with the result. To get an O-line watercolour look to these flowers, I stamped them in antique linen distress ink on cold pressed watercolour card. The pale colour and water reactive nature of this ink will mean that the ink will blend in as I paint, and by the time I finish painting you will barely be able to see it. I stamped the images several times to get a good impression on this textured watercolour card, but even as you can see here, adding the first layers of pink paint, that the ink at the edges of the petals is already starting to blend in, and as I add more layers and deeper colours, you really won't notice the stamp lines by the end. For the flower I used a dilute base layer of QUINACRIDONE coral with depth brought in by a more concentrated mixture of the same paint, and also using QUINACRIDONE rose, which is a deeper, cooler toned paint. A new colour to me and one I'm really enjoying using is Shadow Violet, which is a lovely grey mauve colour and as its name suggests is great for adding shadows. For the stem and leaves of this flower I used a base layer of dilute sap green and then added shadows by mixing with undersea green. To get the deepest of green shadows I dabbed in LUNAR black, and I find not only in watercolouring but other colouring media that dark greys and black are a great way to add depth to greens. One of the things I'm trying to work on more with watercolouring is bringing in lots of different colours while painting to bring things to life. I'm really enjoying watching the UK Portrait Artist of the Year TV show, and the colours the artists see in the skin tones is fascinating. Whereas I might reach for a pale peach with darker and lighter tones, they find all sorts of colours from blues, reds and purples, and yet all of these unlikely colours bring the portrait to life as they sculpt out the features of the sitter. I have a long way to go, but I'm trying to bring in more colours into my painting. For this leaf I use mixtures of greens, yellows, browns and blues. To give contrast to the greens and yellows I'd use for the other leaves, for this leaf I use smoky blues by mixing together ultramarine turquoise and lunar black. While I've been painting the leaves, the flower petals have dried and I'm now going in and adding more layers of colour to build depth and dimension. Adding these extra layers of watercolour is sometimes known as glazing, and as each layer is added, the glaze deepens the colour. I'm no flower expert, but I think these are Helleborus, and referencing pictures of them I decided to paint the flower centres in a mixture of yellows and greens. I've now moved on to using my smaller size 2 brush and adding a few lines here and there to represent the veins of the flowers, and I'm using the original stamped images to reference where to paint these lines. Also I'm going back in and really deepening some of the shadows and for these final layers I'm not worrying about softening the edges of the layer too much, but happy to leave those hard lines to delineate the deeper colours. With the painting now finished, I've removed the painter's tape, keeping the card flat while I painted, and I've pulled out the matching dies for the Even More Spring Flowers set. I used tin snips to break the dies apart, and then line the dies over their matching images and keep them in place with washi before running them through my die cutting machine. I want to loosely arrange the flowers in the top right corner of the panel of watercolour card. However, I feel the background needs a little soft colour, so I've taped the card with painter's tape to a board, and this will keep it flat and prevent it warping from the paint I apply. I'm using a Da Vinci size 24 flat brush. This brush holds lots of water and makes it easy to cover the whole panel with a generous wash of clear water. I'm now using the largest of my Escoda travel brushes. This is the size 12, and I'm loosely applying a wash of dilute mixture of ultramarine turquoise and lunar black. I dried the panel and then added a second layer before generously splattering with the same blue mixture, also some white gouache, and finally a little sap green. I die cut the background panel with a wonky rectangle die to give some nice stitch details around the edges, and then trimmed a piece of fun foam to slightly smaller than the dimensions of the background panel. I used HANSA Stamp's Craft Tacky Glue to adhere the fun foam to the panel and in turn to a fog card base. The fun foam will support the panel and prevent any damage when going through the postal system, and also adhering the panel with a wet glue makes it easy to move the panel around until it's centred nicely on the card front. I added pieces of foam adhesive to the back of the flowers and leaves and then gently arranged them without pressing them down firmly. This meant that I could lift and move them about until I was happy with the arrangement. For the sentiment, I looked through my stamp sets and found the perfect simple Mother's Day sentiment in the So Dear set. I placed a piece of slate card in the MISTI and treated it with a powder tool. I'm going to be heat embossing this sentiment, and the powder will help prevent the embossing powder sticking randomly to the card. I stamped the sentiment in clear embossing ink and then sprinkled with white embossing powder before melting the embossing powder with a preheated heat tool. I trimmed the sentiment to a skinny banner and added it over the flowers with foam adhesive. I kept embellishments simple by adding a few pretty pink Christmas sequins from Little Things from Lucy's cards, which I kept in place with Craft Tacky Glue. And that completes this watercoloured Mother's Day card using the new Even More Spring Flower set from the recent Best Days release from HANSA Stamp. I'll leave links in the YouTube description below to the products that I've used today and to the coordinating blog post over at limedoodledesign.com, where you'll find more details and pictures. Also, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, this blog post is part of a blog hop with lots of inspiration, and if you leave a comment over on my blog post, you'll be entered for a giveaway, so please check out that post. I want to thank you for joining me, and if you've enjoyed this tutorial, I'd be delighted if you subscribe to this channel. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.